Where we left off, we were describing Britain's financial crisis brought on by the destabilization of their economy as a result of World War II, and the fact that after the war, their living standard actually went down, and the government had to institute bread rationing because there wasn't enough bread, which is a big problem. So Britain is so financially weak that it can't even allow its people to buy all the bread they want. And yet, Britain is the world's policeman, has been for hundreds of years, since certainly the Napoleonic Wars. And the British have a massive empire around the world and a lot of responsibilities to defend it. Three of the places where this is becoming a problem is India. British India includes modern Pakistan, and Palestine, which is modern Israel. In the case of India and Pakistan, there is an ongoing movement from the end of World War I, led by India's Congress Party, which included Mahatma Gandhi, the lawyer who had defeated, to some extent, racial laws in South Africa temporarily, and who then went back to India and launched his satyagraha campaigns of resisting the British Empire without using violence. But very courageous guys. These guys would march up to a factory that was closed as part of a protest. And in front of the factory, you'd have armed guards with sticks. And rank upon rank of Congress Party members would go up to these guys with sticks and get beaten. And they would receive blows. Satyagraha, Gandhi's campaign, counted on the British having a sense of decency. Had he tried that stuff against the Imperial Japanese, the Germans, or the Communist Russians, they would have just gotten slaughtered, and it would have failed. But the Brits saw themselves as decent people. Gandhi and his Congress Party, which included Pandit Nehru, a Brahmin prince of Kashmir, very, very, very high caste Hindu, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the head of the Muslim League, was making India ungovernable. During World War II, there was actually a pro-Japanese Indian National Army under a guy named Chandra Bose. And while Gandhi didn't endorse the Japanese, Gandhi, Nehru, and Jinnah did not endorse the British either, and stymied the British war effort. Well, after the war, Britain makes a very snap decision, something that Churchill would have really hated and did really hate. He'd argued against it in the 30s when Gandhi began his campaigns. In 1947, Britain sends its last viceroy, Lord Louis Mountbatten, the cousin of the king, to be the final viceroy of India. Within a year, Mountbatten arranges for the independence of British India. Burma is going to be its own thing anyway, and that had already been in the process of being separated from the rest of British India. Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, that whole region of little Himalayan kingdoms also. But India was this mishmash of princely states and regional states, directly and indirectly ruled by the British through Calcutta. And Mountbatten, again, within a year, a single year, arranges for the independence of India. Basically, Britain goes hot potato with India, and they're getting out of there fast. Now, one of the great problems of India is the separation of Hindus and Muslims. The Hindus want to have a giant Indian confederation, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. The Muslims do not want to be the biggest minority in Hindustan. They want to have their own country, and they insist on it. And their insistence is so great that it becomes clear that they will fight the rest of India for this independence if they need to. They'll fight the British. The Muslims already were not thrilled with the nonviolence of Gandhi. The tendencies in Islamic societies is much more in the spirit of Muhammad than it is of Mohandas K. Gandhi. And Muhammad's example is more militant. So Gandhi has to accept an independent Pakistan and an independent Hindustan, which is what we call India. But how do you draw the boundary? First of all, the Hindu regions of India are on both sides of India, in the northwest and the northeast. Secondly, most communities anywhere near these borders are mixed. So a British geographer is brought in. He spends 3 months in country drawing maps, and he leaves the country before any of his maps are shown to anyone. And that is going to be the border between India and Pakistan. Why did he do all this in secrecy? Because suddenly, tens of millions of people woke up on the wrong side of the border. Tens of millions of Pakistanis and Indians were in the other country, and they didn't want to be in the other country. But this is where their homes were for generations. So tens of millions of refugees suddenly pick up in the summer and fall, which is in India, which means it's ridiculously hot, and start walking on roads through hundreds of miles in the northwest across the Thar Desert, one of the worst places on earth in terms of heat. And you have these scenes of just endless lines of humanity passing one another. And every so often something would happen and there'd be massive violence between these two groups. Finally, most of the folk wandering has happened. And Gandhi himself is assassinated by a radicalized Hindu student who thought he sold out India by allowing the Muslim state of Pakistan to develop. India and Pakistan become permanent enemies, in part because the northern kingdom of Kashmir, the northern region of Kashmir, has a majority Muslim population, but was also the traditional land of the Brahmin princes of the Nehru line, and Nehru becomes the first president of India. Nehru does not want to give up his ancestral lands. The Muslims don't want to give up a region that's largely Muslim, and there's national pride on the line. So the Indians and Pakistanis fight several wars from the 1940s through the 1970s, and now both of them, as of the 1990s, have nuclear weapons. They are still unfriendly towards one another to this day. Britain, hot potato out. It doesn't have the resources to do this. Palestine. Palestine had been heavily settled by Jewish immigrants from the time of the Balfour Declaration. But the British had, in an attempt to appease Arab and Muslim feelings, had begun limiting immigration just at the time when Hitler began his anti-Jewish campaigns within Germany. A lot of Jews who saw the writing on the wall in terms of the danger of Adolf Hitler tried emigrating to Palestine, but the British refused because the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, was rabble-rousing against the British for swamping his lands with Jews. And the Palestinian Arabs, who before this period had nothing distinct about their heritage that made them different from other Arabs, but now they suddenly do. Their region is being invaded by Jewish immigrants, they say. During World War II, I told you how much of a powder keg it was and how risky it was that had Rommel broken through to Cairo, Egypt, the likelihood is that an anti-British, anti-Jewish, pro-Nazi Arab uprising would have taken place throughout the Middle East. And had that happened, the entire history of everything might be different. Britain is dealing with terrorism from Arabs and from several Jewish terrorist groups, including the Haganah, which is sort of the moderate Jewish terrorists, if you can imagine such a thing, who want the British out and who want to become the new government of Israel, and the Irgun, who's headed by Menachem Begin. And these guys, many of them are survivors of the final solution, and they're not compromising with anyone until there is a Jewish state. In 1947, the British made clear to the world, we're leaving on a certain date early in 1948. United Nations, you're a new organization. Hot potato, catch! So the United Nations has to decide what to do with this problem. And what they do is the same solution as India and Pakistan. They divide what had been British Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state, with this sort of gerrymandered line going from the north to the south of the country. And Jerusalem is this little spur that the Jews have a corridor to a region of the city of Jerusalem, but the area around Jerusalem is mostly Arab. At no point does the proposed Jewish state have any real geographical integrity. The Arabs also make clear that if the UN does this, the moment the British leave, they're going to drive the Jews into the sea. They're going to fight. Well, in 1947, in an amazing United Nations vote, the United States and the Soviet Union both vote for the establishment of the two-state solution in Palestine, and the United Nations is going to hand things over to a Jewish and an Arab authority in Palestine. Well, by the time 1948 comes around, 5 Arab armies from Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, the Arab Legion is in Jordan, all invade the Jewish areas and the Palestinian Arabs themselves. The first Arab-Israeli war is fought starting in 1948 through 1949 into 1950. And these fights are nasty guerrilla-type campaigns. When everything starts, the Arabs have tanks, fighter planes, a few jets. The Israelis have infantry weapons and the Haganah and the Irgun, and that's about it. They actually get a hold of some old German Messerschmitt 109s from the Czechs. And so the first Israeli Air Force is composed of Nazi warplanes. There's a little irony in history there. But the Israelis fight the Arabs off and win the first Arab-Israeli war. And during that war, the leaders of the Palestinian Authority, including Haj Amin al-Husseini and his Nazi advisors, and he had several, advised the Palestinians not to cooperate with the Jews in their so-called homeland, but to leave, and when the Arab armies came in, they would come back in victory. Well, the Arab armies never came back in victory, and so the problem of Palestinian refugees began. The Israeli position is that the Palestinian Arabs who left in the first Arab-Israeli war left the country in time of war, and they gave up any rights to property or citizenship that they would have had they stayed. And many Arabs did stay, and they retained their citizenship as citizens of Israel, as non-Jews in a Jewish state. The rest of the Arab world, does it take the Palestinian Arabs in? Does it invite them to become natives in their own country? No. It puts them into refugee camps, stinking, crime-ridden, filthy refugee camps. And the Palestinians are treated like trash by their fellow co-religionists, Muslims, and they become embittered and prone to an ongoing campaign of terrorism, which isn't necessarily rational. It is all based on the Maccabean notion that if God is with us, who can be against us? And that all we have to do is, like in the Crusades, just keep fighting the infidel, and eventually we'll drive them out with sheer force of numbers, inshallah, by God's will. But the British are out because they don't have the oomph for it. This conflict also creates an opportunity for the Soviets to get involved in the Middle East.